Nigel Greenwood is a credit analyst at S&P. Jack Bouroudjian is the chairman of Capital Market Technologies and joins us from Chicago. Jack, I want to start with you in Chicago. We thought this morning we were going to have a positive start on the equity markets, but it's a lack of understanding, to my mind, about exactly how these government schemes are going to be working both over on your side of the pond in the US and over here in Europe that continues to spook people. Am I getting that right?
No, absolutely. In fact, remember, one of the reasons that we saw that little rally in banking stocks overnight was because there was short covering. Primarily, there was something that was said that had a little meat on the bone. The reality is that now that we've gotten to the point where we're looking and we're starting to digest what was said, we realize that there are still a lot of details left on the table that are unanswered. But more importantly, and this is something that is a buzz among the trading community, you now have government that is going to take such a large role in all of these lenders. And the real question is, are they capable of playing that role? And that's really what it's coming out to, and that's what the messages the market is sending us.
Nigel, Jack raises a good point. We've got government taking control over in the United States. We've got government taking control over here. Look at Nicolas Sarkozy's move when it comes to the two mutuals in France. In Germany, we're nationalising banks. We've already done it in Britain. Is government biting off more than it can chew? And how does the government get to grips with the problem when the banking sector itself really fails to understand it?
It's certainly true different countries deal with this in different ways. All I can talk about is the British example. Arguably we're ahead of the game here. If you think about Northern Rock, a year ago it announced its business plan, which had well-intended intentions to manage down the balance sheet. But a year on, today there's been the announcement of the complete changing strategy and to increase mortgage lending again. So it shows the unintended consequences of government action, which they have to perhaps change down the line.
Northern Rock, you could argue, though, is a case where nationalisation does work. Was it small enough that it was possible to make it work because it really didn't have the kind of scale that a Citigroup or an RBS has? Was Northern Rock small enough that it was actually able to be managed by governments? Do you think some of these larger institutions, such as RBS, could be?
That's a fair comment, because Northern Rock is wholly UK-based, essentially one business line, i.e. mortgages. When you're talking about RBS or indeed Citi, these are really huge institutions with major global activities. And the strategy to perhaps divert RBS back to its UK core base, well, this is one of the issues the CEO is grappling with now, because they've got so many businesses globally. What do they keep? What do they hold on to? What is the political influence of the UK government on that difficult process?
Jack, let me come back to you. The US government wants to stress test the balance sheets of these banks. How on earth are they going to manage that, given the fact that it's such a moving target, everything is being repriced, nobody has a good grip, let alone the banks themselves?
You know what, that is the million-dollar question. In fact, that is one of the reasons that we are setting lows as I am speaking here. That seems to be the overriding black cloud right now hanging over our new Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, what he's been saying, what he's been trying to accomplish. The bottom line is that he's coming out with these grand plans, but we have been hearing these grand plans now for months. The reality is, until we get details that make sense to the capital markets, they are going to be treating every day with the same kind of confusion as we've seen over the course of the last few months.
The thing is, though, Jack, we seem to have gone full circle here. We know that the banks are in trouble, but we now seem to have come back to the situation, not come back to it, we've got to a situation where we're expecting government to deliver. It's the governments that are rescuing the banks, not the other way around. Are we getting this the wrong way around?
No. In fact, you've got it absolutely right. And one of the biggest problems that we have here in the States is that this is something that's completely new to us, having government playing such a major role. Now, here is the real paradox. Not only do we have government as our #1 partner with the lending institutions, we have the rhetoric coming out of Washington has never been more anti-business. So this is really creating a lot of confusion here. And I'll give you a prime example. Putting a $500,000 cap on the salaries that anybody within these institutions can earn is absolutely ludicrous. You're going to end up with all of the talent going to private equity, going to people that can afford it. Mohammed Al-Arian at PIMCO is going to have a field day as he picks off all this talent. How in God's name do they expect to make that money back, my tax dollar money incidentally, when that money isn't being managed by the best and brightest minds on the street? Now that's something to think about.
That's a good point to leave that conversation. Mohammed's a lovely guy, though. You'd love to go and work for him. I'm only joking. But let's talk a little bit, Nigel, about that issue that Jack raises, and that's the issue of regulation. We saw the summit over this weekend in Berlin. We've had comments from Jean-Claude Trichet echoing a similar sentiment. Is there a danger that we now over-regulate some of these banks, that they don't provide the necessary innovation that we need in our economies?
I think it's a very slow-moving process. If you think about it, we're 18 months into the downturn. It's undoubtedly got a long way to go, and regulation will gradually step up throughout this process. But there are bigger issues driving bank performance in the coming months, most notably credit losses.
I understand your point that there is a short-term phenomenon here, but as people try and invest in these businesses, they're trying to see if there's a glimmer of hope that there is a business beyond simply dealing with the credit problems. And you've got to wonder, given the regulatory imperative that government now seems to have, and Jack was talking about the sort of the vitriol that seems to come out of Capitol Hill. A similar story here in Europe to a certain extent, whether or not there's going to be much of a business to invest in after this, because, as he says, the brightest and the best will end up getting sucked out.
Yeah, so all of the rating action we've been taking, whilst obviously it's been impacted by the weakening financial profile of these businesses, we're also factoring in the weakening of their business profile, which includes not only reducing geographically, but also this growing political and regulatory involvement in the system, i.e. increasing industry risk. This is very real in the UK. And we're trying to look ahead 3 to 5 years' time when banks are weaning themselves off government funding support. What are these banks ultimately going to look like? And the probability is they will emerge much weaker institutions than they were 5 years ago, albeit probably a lot more conservative.
Jack, let me wrap it up with you. Last question. What do you think the US banking sector will look like in 18 months' time, 2 years' time?
It's going to be 2 or 3 major banks that are basically controlled by the government. And, unless we can start to see some private equity come in, we're going to have just a recurring problem with solvency. But, I want to add one thing about regulation. There are certain regulations that actually make sense. SEPA, the single euro payment area, things that are making capital efficiency absolutely vital are things that I think are happening that will end up helping the banking sector down the road. And these are things that are happening in Europe today.
And presumably as well, things that we now talk about sort of with such hate and horror, such as credit default swaps, all these sort of things, some of this stuff that wasn't regulated before, that wasn't traded in an open and transparent fashion. These products are good, they just need to be actually brought into the light, don't they, Jack?
Well, we need transparency. We need a central price discovery mechanism. That's something that we have done here for 100 years, right behind me on the floor of the exchanges. So we understand mark-to-market. We understand the need for transparency. Those are the instruments that need to get into our world, into our arena, and more importantly, have to get understood by the treasurers and those people that are actually managing them on their portfolios. That was the biggest problem. People had them in their portfolios and didn't understand what the nature of these instruments really were.
Guys, let's wrap it up there. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Jack Bouroudjian out of Chicago, Nigel Greenwood joining us from London.